I was telling JD, it put me in a terrible quandary because I actually enjoy this more than the other group I've been with for 11 years. So
You tell all the girls that.
and I'll kiss you in the morning. But I tried to stay along kind of the same flow that you were doing. And I guess I missed one heck of a presentation with Nick. And so I asked JD, I said, do you have a format or some sort of PowerPoint I can use as a guide? And he sent me your presentation. And I said, geez, that's a lot like what I was going to talk about, only better. But I tried to incorporate some other things that I've done. And there's one slide I know I used with this group before, but I'll tell you the reason why here in a second. I love this picture. Isn't it? It just feels so doggone good. I call this presentation a spiritual awakening. It was for me, having gone through this process. And I use the term knowing my truth. And it may not be a term that you're used to using. Do you have any guesses what knowing my truth is about?
Knowing yourself?
Yeah, it's exactly, you get down to the bare essence, right? And one of the things, Nick, that you talked about was authenticity. And this whole idea about being truthful to yourself in front of God. It's a big deal. Not an easy thing to do. And it starts off reflection, examination, and reconciliation. What's reflection? This is really getting down to the essence of oneself. What is reflection?
I'd say taking a current look at your state of mind or state of being, what it is before you kind of dig for that.
How many people do like a daily reflection, either at night or in the morning? And why is it important?
To slow down.
Yeah. Yeah, when I worked at Boeing, they had basically a slogan that talked about all thrust and no rudder, which is kind of how I live my life. You know, so the reflection part, you know, ask yourself, what the heck happened? You know, a lot of times I don't even recap what I've done, and sometimes there's some very important things. So the reflective part is basically just asking yourself, if you're doing it by day, what happened? You don't delve into things. You're just reflecting, you know, kind of the chronology of what happened. Now the examination part. When you understand what happened, the examination part is, why did it happen? Why did things happen the way they did? Now you're starting to get deeper. And reconciliation. Reconciliation to me is bridging the gap between what happened, why it happened, and what am I going to do next? What am I going to do about the things that I've just started to review in myself? And that's the part, that's the action part, is the reconciliation. You know, you reconcile between what happened, and more importantly, you start to understand why it happened. It's a nice little picture. Got it off Google Images. I don't even know who it is or what it is. John said, yeah, that's pretty good. It fits right where I want it. Now this is something I did, I don't know, 7, 8 years ago. And we were studying the characteristics of saints. Obviously, I go to a Catholic church. And one of the things that we looked at in the Catholic religion, there's a process for sainthood. But, you know, it's neither here nor there. The object was, our priest said, your goal for the Men of Faith, our group, is to become a saint and guarantee your family will be in heaven with you. That was kind of the essence. And a lot of people, when they preach, they talk at a very 30,000 foot level. And it's nice to say, you know, your goal is to become a saint. And I said, well, there's a difference between thought and action. So I thought I would do something, you know, a lot of my background is in information systems. And one of the things, our company built a platform jointly with the 3M company. And what it does, it's the world's first connection engine, very different than search. Search is very linear. You know, if you don't ask the right question, you don't get the right answer. But 3M's a company that's defined by innovation. And if you study innovation, 100% of all of the innovations we looked at happen when two different disparate items, could be competencies, businesses, whatever. When those disparate things that have nothing in common get together, and innovation is enabled. So if you take a look at, you know, for instance, automotive, Rockefeller, when he ran Standard Oil, and back then Standard Oil produced kerosene. And the reason they produced kerosene, it was the source for heating, lighting, you know, all of those things. There wasn't anything that Standard Oil hated worse when they processed crude oil than the aromatics. In this case, it's gasoline. And the reason why Standard Oil had things like Pennzoil and other places in the Midwest, Ohio, Pennsylvania, was they wanted to locate their refineries next to a water source so they could run this stuff off, the gasoline. That's what they did. And so the more turbulent, the more easier it was absorbed in the air. And the one thing most people don't understand about Rockefeller, he used to take subscriptions to every major newspaper in the world. And he would look for new technologies. And one of the things he read about is in Manchester, England, there was a development of the internal combustion engine. So the reason they produced kerosene is you didn't need any other fuels. Think about not having any internal combustion engine at that point in time. And as he was reading this, you know, it became clear it's a great way to do something, you know, in a smaller power plant, because what they typically used were steam engines. You know, nothing says economy like a 2,000-pound steam engine in the front of your car. So he started looking, and he said, you know, this specific area that they had, this gasoline, which was the bane of their existence. All of a sudden, he was saying, well, low flash point, easy to drink. You know what, this is a perfect way to fuel an internal combustion engine. So they took the internal combustion engine, they took what was pure waste when you make kerosene, they combined the two, put it on a horseless carriage, and guess what happened? The innovation was the automotive. So one of the things, it works, the connection engine works very, very differently than any other type of technology. And it was created specifically to drive innovations. The human mind can process typically 7 different relationships. And The reason why it typically doesn't work more than 7 for most people is that if you try to overburden your thought, your autonomic thoughts, your breathing, blood pumping, all that stuff takes a lot of that energy away for your ability to start thinking about abstract things. So anyhow, I thought to myself, you have this tremendous tool. Why don't you take it and apply it towards saints? And so the one thing about the Catholic Church, because it's an old church, is they have archives that are digitized. And I'll just throw this out. Anybody have any idea how many saints there are in the Catholic Church?
A lot.
It is. It's about 10,000. And the reason why I say it's about is that the criteria changed over time. But anyhow, I took and tried to bring in as many of those biographies as I could. And I said, if you want to emulate to become a saint, what are the characteristics that these saints had in common? Sounds like an easy thing to do. 100,000 pages of data later, after going through all of that, the object became, how do you really get it down to the essence of what are the characteristics of saints, 2,000 years ago today? And basically what we came out with, after all of this time and effort, because it was an effort, there were 3 basic areas that showed up when we tracked them. And there were, at the very end, we had almost 10,000 pages of summarized data. But the 3 that when we looked were conviction. Does anybody know what conviction is? It's a faith you're willing to bleed for. That's the way I kind of define conviction. So it's beyond something that says, I believe. And the conviction they typically had was about purpose. What purpose am I here for? What purpose do I serve? My faith, how do I believe? And my truth. This is what defines my spiritual DNA. Conviction, and these actually have a process flow to them, but the conviction is what defines me. The second area is about compassion. And the answer is, in what defines me, it's not about me. The saints truly believe it's about others. It's not about me. I serve others. And in the compassion area, the key areas were grace, mercy, and humility. Does everybody know what grace is? I don't want to use terms that you don't understand. What's grace?
Getting out of jail free.
What you say, Nick?
I said it's receiving something that you're undeserving of.
Exactly. That's the key point. Grace is granted. You try to work for it, but grace is always granted. It is. It's a gift that you don't deserve. Right? So what's mercy?
Not getting what
That's exactly right. Did you say it again, sir?
you deserve. Not getting what you deserve.
If you think about all the stupid things you do every day, if God didn't grant you mercy, that's a big compilation. Yeah, I can tell you it is for me. What's humility?
Not being proud. Knowing that you receive mercy and grace.
Even though you don't deserve it, either way, right? The other part about humility, and I'll get into this, is that humility is honesty before God. You know, if there is one message that you can take with you today, humility is honesty before God. There will be a time and place when you have to be able to explain what you did. And that's really hard to do. Why is that level of humility so hard to do?
We don't accept responsibility for our actions.
Right.
How many of you, when you actually do a little reflection, say, man, what a dumbass I was? There's no humility about that. And the third piece is, if you understand what you're about, and you understand it's not about you, the next area is about courage. And it's kind of funny, during our research, we looked at different types of displays of courage. And one of the key ones is that there was the lady, and this was in the subway in Manhattan. She fell off onto the tracks. The guy was standing right next to her, jumped off onto the tracks, pushed her down. Do you remember that? It was about 7 years ago. And it was really good. I remember I actually dug up the files on it. And when the reporter said, why would you do that? Guess what his response was?
Why wouldn't?
Exactly. You can't do that if you don't understand your conviction. So the reason why, if you put this whole thing together, if what you truly believe in your conviction is there is no greater love than giving oneself, one's life to another, right? If you understand that, then that tells you what you're about, but it also tells you it's about compassion you have towards others. It's about them. And when you have that in mind, when something happens, what he was talking about is he had 0 time to make a decision. If he wouldn't have acted, if he would have thought about, oh, let me see, what's the clearance between the tracks and the bottom of that track? Oh, that's an interference fit. Don't want to go there. No, if he would have spent time thinking about it, it wouldn't have happened. Courage happens when those first two are aligned. Courage is your, like it says here, the action that you display, because you don't have to make a decision. You know what you're about. That's great acts of courage. Always involve doing something for others. And that's what the compassion piece is.
You just had a really good idea.
Yeah, like Charlie Brown with that. Does that make sense to you? This really gets in depth, but the key thing, I want you to understand is the reason why we do reflection is to better understand your conviction. And that's a daily process. I went to a conference and it was all about St. Peter. Does everybody know St. Peter? Yeah. Did you ever think about all of the disciples? Here's a guy, he's a fisherman, and he's a big guy. And there's nothing fancy about St. Peter whatsoever. Why did Jesus pick him as the rock, the foundation to build his church? This gets back to your presentation, Nick. The one thing about St. Peter, he never gave excuses. He did some stupid things, but he never once gave any excuses. No rationalization. That's why he was the rock. He accepted responsibility and kept moving forward. You know, he reminds you sometimes of a young kid. When he saw Jesus, remember when he was in the boat? He just immediately ran to him. And then he realized, well, this is water. You know, it's just that level of enthusiasm that he felt. It was pure and unadulterated in how he felt things. He was, as you put out last week, authentic. Was he the smartest? No. Matthew and Thomas, some of the other folks that, you know, were attorneys or other things, they were far more educated. But that's not why he was chosen. The whole idea that you brought out last week about being authentic, that means you don't have 4 coats of varnish on what you're about. This is kind of the other side of compliance, the way I look at it. Compliance is, I know what the 10 Commandments are, and I follow those immensely. What did Jesus say about the people that live by the commandments? Good people? Of course. They are people that follow rules. But that's not what he asked for. What did he ask for? Pick up your cross and follow me. God, I love this book, The Voice of the Martyrs. God will judge us not according to how much we endured, but how much we could love. It's not about compliance. It's not about following the rules. You know, one of the great stories in here, I'm trying to remember his name, Maximilian Kolbe. He was a Catholic priest, and he was sent to Auschwitz. And sometimes if somebody tried to escape, those people that were in your area of living, 10 of them were chosen to be executed. It was harsh. But guess what? If you want to escape, you got to realize it's the other 9 guys that are going to be paying just as much as you are. And when he was in Auschwitz, there was a person that tried to escape. And so the Germans, you know, picked out 10 people that were in their bunker and said, okay, you guys are all going to get executed tomorrow morning. And one guy just flew apart. You don't understand. I have kids. I have a life. I have other things I'm doing. I can't die. And he just went on and on. And Maximilian Kolbe said, I'll take his place. And they said, but you're not even Jewish. He goes, yeah, I know. But I will take his place. And so even in, you know, the desperation that they were in, he showed what love was about. It was kind of funny, I was reading the whole biography part, and when they put you in for execution, what they typically did was they'd give you a lethal injection. And it didn't work on Maximilian Kolbe. And so then they put him in this other house of starvation where they would starve you, not give you any water, no food, and it kept on ticking. So finally they loaded up, you know, and this was days after everybody else was gone. They doubled the dose on the lethal injection and he finally died. But I mean, it was just a long period, and when you read about him, he was saying, I tried to give strength to those that were still living that had not died yet. And then all 9 of them died, and he died. Now I'm switching to the secular view. This is the practical things that we see. To thine own self be true. How many people have heard that? Shakespeare, right? And it was from Polonius to his son who was leaving. And that was in Hamlet. And it's one of the famous things. So even out of the religious context, people still understand that. Be true to yourself. Anybody ever see that model? When I was working and I was a young fellow, I was assigned to bring Toyota into the U.S. And for a year, I was sent to Japan to go through all of their training. And I had some unbelievable amounts of education. And to try to bring that, and this was in Lexington, outside of Lexington, in Georgetown, Kentucky. It's where we were building the first new Toyota facility in the U.S. And so one of the things I tried to do was interpret between culturalization of what was important to Toyota into Georgetown, Kentucky. Yeah. And so the first thing you do is you look at the culture that's there. And when you go in the South, this was the southern part of Kentucky. The things that I knew that they really liked were SEC football and NASCAR. Man, they love their NASCAR. So I said, okay, if you want to take this whole kind of process mentality and, you know, put it in their language, their meaning, I said, they know what that is. You know, Andy Granatelli, you know, used to race, you know, Indy 500, all these kinds of things. NASCAR, you know, Richard Petty had that whole thing on the front of his hood. And I said, they'll relate to this. So I took all of the process mentality that the Japanese used, and I called it STP, easily recognizable. Situation, target, and plan. That's the essence of process. And the reason why you do that, we found out with a lot of study that if you're going to do problem solving, 95% of problem solving is solved at the situational level. Everybody has to have the same baseline of thinking about what is the current situation. Who, what, where, when, why, how, those kinds of things. The key is that we try to solve problems without understanding what the baseline is or agreement upon the baseline. So once you agree on what the current situation is, you know, I can tell you when I was there, you understand on the assembly line, you have this metronome going off in your head all the time because they're driven by the assembly side. And then what happens is that if something goes down on the assembly line, you better figure it out, and you better figure it out fast, because it was $7.6 million per minute that line was down. Of course, that's 30 years ago, but yeah, somewhere in there. So the key is you develop a common nomenclature about problem solving and thought mentality. First thing they get together is what's the situation? Is it pneumatic? Is it electrical? You know, what's the issue? And then you decided, well, if it's pneumatic, okay, then you went to the target. How do we fix it? You know, I need 2 people, I need da-da-da-da-da. Okay, what's the plan? We implement the target and we meet back here in 45 seconds. Boom. So you don't have to, you know, spend a lot of time thinking about it, because the common lexicon is what we're on STP. Same thing, I'm saying that's the secular version of what we're talking about around getting to the point of being authentic. And the first thing you do in reflection is what? What's the situation? what all happened yesterday? You know, did I do foolish things? Was I short with Don?
Should be.
I'll have you know here, 2 weeks ago, Don helped push me out in my car out of a snowbank. And he was heading over here, weren't you? To church for one of the,
Halloween.
At our church,
yeah, yeah. So I'm just saying, you know, there you go. Your dad's a hero. At least for me. But anyhow, the whole situation, target and plan, same kind of mentality that goes with authenticity. Know what you're about. Understand the current situation. What's going to be your targets? What's your plan for making things better? Same. Key takeaway from today, and I'll tell you this several times, if nothing else, remember this. Humility is self-honesty before God. You know, my problem is I'm such a good rationalizer. I can rationalize anything. Well, you shouldn't have done that. Well, she was going 43 miles an hour, and, you know, you should be glad it didn't T-bar. Don't rationalize it. You know, accept it. And that's what this is about. Humility is self-honesty before God. Strip out all the other stuff. Be truthful. Two questions. They're closely related. What prevents me from defining my truth? I lie to myself all the time. How do I reconcile my life with my truth? And if you figure that one out, come tell me.
Those are pretty deep questions.
Those are pretty deep questions. That's why we work in tables. Because we're going to need some help with each other. But anyhow, that's what we have is